Hello everyone. I would also like to welcome you to our webinar. So let's start with the introduction of revenue and expense deferrals by SYSTRONICS. Revenue and expense deferrals is an application that helps companies amortize maintenance or service-related contract revenues or expenses over the life of the contract. The application areas can also include subscriptions, memberships, school fees, and more. Also, the application can be configured to process transactions from any module of Sage 300, including third-party SDK applications, as long as they post their transactions to GL and support the transaction analysis and optional fields creator module. This is because all of the processing logic of the revenue and expense deferrals is actually based on the GL module. Transactions must be posted in the general ledger to be picked up by revenue and expense deferrals, and those transactions are picked up based on optional fields. Generally, deferral transaction would be a case where you recognize the revenue or expense of an invoice or a cash that has been received or paid later. So, for example, a deferred revenue would be a received cash or invoice for services that has not yet been performed, or a deferred expense or a prepaid expense would be a case where you have made payment for a good or service, but you have not yet received the good or the service. There are three types of deferral methods that are supported by revenue and expense deferrals. The straight line method, that we recognize equal amounts for each period. The declining balance, that we recognize a percentage of the remaining amount for each year. And the manual method, which we manually specify the recognition schedule. An example of using the manual deferral method would be if we want to skip some months in middle of our schedule. And for each deferral method, it is possible to put recognitions on hold until some external event. It is also possible to delay the first transaction by a specified number of days. So let's look at an example. Let's assume that we sell a newspaper subscription of $120 for a year. Our deferral method is straight line. So, once we post the related transaction to General Ledger, the revenue and expense deferrals will identify the transaction using optional fields. Then it will defer the revenue or expense amount, in this case $120. In other words, it will remove the transaction amount from the original General Ledger account, so if it's revenue, from the sales account, and post it temporarily to a deferral account that has been predefined, in this case deferred revenue account. Later, it will recognize the amount based on a created schedule. So in our case, we will recognize $10 each month for a year. And it will remove the $10 or the recognized amount from the deferred revenue account and will post it back to the original account or the sales account that we have. So this deferral account is what we use temporarily to post the transaction amount until it can be recognized. So, if we are not using revenue deferrals, once we sign the contract, we will recognize the $120 in January and it will be over. But with the revenue deferrals, we will recognize $10 in January, then $10 in February. So until February, we will recognize $20. And only in December, we will recognize the full amount of $120. Now let's see this example in practice in Sage 300. Now, we have an order of newspaper subscription for $120. So let's enter the order. we have one order, and because the revenue and expense deferral needs to pick up the transactions based on the optional fields that we specify here, we enter the related fields. So let's say that the contract starts on January 1st. So the defer from is January 1st, and it lasts for a year. So the end of our contract is December 31st. The deferral period determines how often we want to recognize a portion of the revenue. So it is the frequency of recognition. In our example, we are recognizing each month, so we choose calendar month. And as we know, our deferral method is a straight line, so we just choose a straight line. Here I should mention that it is important that Sage 300 is configured in a way that the optional fields and their values flow from one module to other until they reach to GL, because that's the only way that the revenue and expense deferrals will pick up the transactions. So I also ship this order and create an invoice and post it. Let's go to AR and check the transaction. Here is our transaction, invoice number 89. Let's see if the optional fields are correct. Yes. So we post this to GL. And finally, let's see the transaction in General Ledger. Now, here we have our sales account. And as you can see, we have our optional fields flown to GL. So all is fine here, and we can post the transaction. Okay, so now let's go to our module and run the RD processing. Before running the RD processing, we can print the pre-processing report to see which transactions will be deferred once we click the processing button. So we can see that the invoice number 89 will be deferred with the amount of $120. And here, if we had entered some wrong information in the optional fields, we would see some exceptions that would not be processed, but we don't have them now. But this part is for the exceptions that will not be deferred. So we close this report and we process the RD processing on the 1st of January. As you can see, a deferral batch has been created. So let's go to GL and see what happened. Here you can see in the description that an RD generated deferral batch has been created. Let's open it. And here we see that $120 has been taken out from the sales account, from the original account, and posted to the deferred revenue account. Exactly what we expected from our example. Let's close this. And also we want to see our recognition schedule. To do that, we go to RD transactions, transaction details, and as for our invoice, now let's see which informations are shown in each tab. We have the transaction details tab. This tab shows all the information related to our original AR invoice. So we have the invoice number, and we can easily drill down to the original transaction that was sent from AR, $120 credited to our sales account. The second tab shows the deferral parameters, the method, the calculation base, the deferment period, and the deferment, the whole year that we are deferring the transaction. On the third tab, we can see our schedule. So as you can see, each month, $10 will be recognized until December, until the end of December. Right now, we do not have any recognized transactions because we processed the RD for the 1st of January. So in this column, we can see that none of the transactions have been recognized. So let's process the RD processing again, this time setting the date for a month later on 31st of January. Now you can see that a recognition batch has been created. So let's go to GL and see the result. Here we can see that an RD generated recognition batch has been created. So if we check this, we can now see that $10 has been credited to our sales account. So it has been taken out of the deferred revenue account and posted to our original account. And this will go on until in the end of December, we will have the full $120 recognized. Okay, so also, let's check our transaction details again, just to see that one of our transactions has been already recognized. So for January, this is recognized. And we can reverse this transaction by clicking this reverse. It will reverse the transaction in GL, or we can also reverse the full deferral process from RD processing reversal. Now, every time that you want to defer a transaction, as you saw, we will need to enter 4 or 5 optional fields for the transaction. We actually don't need to do that every time. Instead, we can use the RD templates. So if we have many contracts with similar parameters of deferral, we can create a template from templates and then use only one optional field to defer the transaction. The value of that optional field will be the template code. For example, here we have our subscription template code. We have the straight line method, the deferment period as calendar month, and we have defined the deferral period to be from the transaction date until 1 year later. The revenue and deferrals will use all the information defined for the template code. So let's go back to our example and this time use the template code instead of entering multiple fields. Again, we enter the order for the customer. And this time, in the optional fields, we only enter the template code. Close this. Again, ship the order and make an invoice and post it. We go back to accounts receivable, check our transaction, all is fine with the optional fields. We post this again and we go back to general ledger. And post this transaction again. And again, we will go to the RD processing and we'll process the transaction for January 1st. Again, a deferral badge is created. So again, we can see in the general ledger that the same process has been done as before, only this time we used the template code. And also we can see in transaction details that for invoice number 90, the same schedule was created. Again, $10 to be recognized for each month. So we can do the same process for deferring expenses. Our example was about revenue, but we can do it for expenses from purchase order AP following the same procedure as the revenue deferrals. Also, deferral schedule creation can be automatically done. We don't have to run RD processing manually all the time. We can configure the application to run automatically according to a predefined schedule. And revenue and expense deferrals provides various reports and inquiries to keep track of RD processing. We have already seen one of those reports, which was the pre-processing report, which shows us what transactions will be deferred once we click the processing button. So let's see some other reports. The first one, the audit log. This report shows all the transactions that were generated in RD and were sent to GL. We print it when we want to see the deferral or recognition transactions created during the RD processing. So we can choose to print deferral transactions, recognition transactions, or both. Let's print both. And also we can sort it by GL account or RD processing number. Now, in this report, we can see two of the invoices that we created, the last invoices. You can see here that the invoice number 89, the source amount is $120 and $10 has already been recognized. For the second invoice, we did not recognize anything, so we just have the $120 that was deferred. The second report is the revenue flash report. This report shows how much was deferred for a single transaction. So it shows us how much was deferred, how much was recognized, and how much is still to be recognized. We can print this report in summary, detail, or document balance. Let's print the summary. And here, for our two invoices, we can see that for the first invoice, the 89, $10 is already recognized and $110 is yet to be recognized, and the original amount was $120. For the second one, $120 needs to be recognized. We can print it in detail, which it will show us each recognition or deferral line by line, and we can also print in document balance type. In this case, we will need to specify a time range, and the report will show us how much was deferred at the beginning of the time period that we specify, how much was deferred or recognized during the period, and how much has remained to be recognized in the end of the specific period. So let's print the report. And for our transactions again, for the 89 invoice, we can see that between January 1st until end of February, $10 was recognized, and after February, there is still $110 that needs to be recognized. The next report is deferred revenue report. This is actually an aging report. It shows unrecognized revenue or expense amounts during each of the defined aging periods. You can also enter a cutoff date for the report, and by doing so, the report will consider amounts recognized or deferred only if the recognition or deferral took place before the specified cutoff date. So we print the report. And we can see for our invoice number 89, that in this aging period, $10 was recognized, and the rest is yet to be recognized. The next report is related to the reversals, which I already told that we can reverse the deferral process. It will show us which RD processing numbers have been reversed. Because we have not reversed any transactions, we will not see any data for now in the reversal report. Then we have the recognition table. This table will show the exact recognition schedule that we saw in transaction details. The next report is transactions on hold. As I said, we can put some transactions on hold and recognize them later. This report will show the transactions that are on hold. Then we have the report that is related to exceptions. Now this report, let's print it. This report will show the transactions that have not been deferred due to some exception. An exception occurs when the program is unable to defer transactions because of incomplete, invalid deferment information, or when the GL entry for the deferral transaction can't be created. So this report is a historical report. It shows transactions that should have been deferred but are not due to wrong information. So right now we don't have any, but this is similar to the pre-processing report, the exception part. Only the difference is that this shows the transactions that should have been deferred. Pre-processing reports exception part shows the transactions that will not be reported. So it shows the future. And then we have the document expiry report. This report will show us when our contracts will be expired. Our contracts or subscriptions there can be expired, and this report shows when. Now we can see that after 90 days we have some contracts, including our 2 invoices, that will be expired. Before that, we do not have any contracts that are going to be expired. Also, we have 2 inquiries in RD, one of them being the customer inquiry, which is very similar to AR customer inquiry. The only difference is that for the documents that we know are already deferred, we can check for their recognition schedule. For example, we had our invoice number 89. We know that we have deferred this transaction, so we can go and look for the recognition schedule and the deferral parameters. And we have the RDGL comparison inquiry. We can use this inquiry to match the transactions generated by RD and transactions in GL. We select the deferred revenue or expense account. So our deferred revenue account was 4,300, which we had defined in RD setups. And we can choose a time period. And let's see what the inquiry shows. The first grid, the RD transaction, the left grid shows the left grid. It shows the details of the transactions generated in RD. The right grid shows the details of the corresponding RD transactions posted in GL. Now, as you can see here, we have some transactions that are in red and some transactions that are in black. The black transactions are transactions that have a matching GL transaction that has been posted. The red ones are transactions that are in RD, but in GL they have not yet been posted. So we have either forgotten to post or they're just not posted. Then the second grid is unmatched GL transactions. This grid shows the details of an RD transaction posted for the defined deferral revenue or expense account, in our case the revenue account, where the account is not used as a deferral account. This will happen when the defined deferred revenue or expense account has also been used as an original account from which amount has been deferred, or an account to which recognition has been posted. So in our case, this account, 4300, has once been used as the original account, so some amount has actually been deferred from this account. And the third grid, which is the unmatched GL transactions grid, shows the details of the transactions for the defined deferred revenue account in other modules. So here we can see that we had a transaction using this account in RD with GL journal entry. Also, we can use this inquiry to compare the balances in RD with GL. That's all that I would like to show.